entirely new stage, as in their shock, their enemy didn't let the opportunity go to waste. Omniversal Emperor's Haki. His dominium was squeezed once more as he spent a great deal of its authority, and this time it was being directed to Basilius Amelusa, as her existence began to freeze at the sheer regality of an omniversal lineage. And at the same time this occurred, another part of Noah's dominium was making grand moves. His existential body dominium facing the potpourri was undergoing and carrying out its own changes, with its focus currently being set on a feature developed not too long ago. The extremity of loot is modifying the log-on and log-off feature. The feature was left inactive as the battles this time were head-on, but it was still too supreme to be left alone. The light of existential dominium shines with the ever-present glory. New modifications have been made. From this moment on, whenever the authorities of your dominium come in contact with enemy dominium, loot and devouring will automatically extract a percentage of their authority. Direct contact of dominiums will allow for the extraction of 0.5% of the enemy's existential dominium, while indirect contact with their dominium will allow for the extraction of 1% of the enemy's existential dominium. You can accept this as a form of pure authority, or it can be transformed across your havens and forged to form quintessential fruits of existence. A modification was made, and Noah's body, pulsing with tendrils of golden light, struck out against the potpourri once more. Boom! His fist smashed into its abomination of a fist as neither was pushed back, but wondrously, a clear glow of gold erupted from the impact and became absorbed into Noah's dominium. The potpourri paused briefly as its dominium locked onto Noah, seeing the devilish eyes of this being, as he now breathed in before beginning to release a barrage of strikes with his fist that were so fast that they formed phantoms of brilliance. Such brilliance unfolded within the Archeos Vitalis Pylos that was being absorbed at this very moment by Noah's terrifying construct. Chapter 2967, Annals Fall. 1. How could he achieve his goals in the fastest and most efficient way possible? This was a question Noah's extremes that were swirling within his dominiums always sought to answer. Some of them were already existential, others were merely borrowing the existential light within his dominium, but all of them were working together to ensure his success and livelihood. His authorities as the weaver of extremity and existence were the most active as they sought to obtain information about the weavings of existence and extremes themselves in order for him to see how to move. This was how he had found out that his enemies were away from their abodes and that he could enter to relish in chaos at this moment. After that inflow of weavings, more continued to come as they allowed Noah to dictate how he should move still. He kept his bodies moving in the Archeos Vitalis Pylos because this was the extent he could currently handle. Information was not leaving this dominium as the reality of his enemies being away from their homes was temporary. He had to achieve his goals and make an escape before the enemies returned. They were far advanced in the existential dominion realm as they had been enjoying fruits of existence for eons, and the weavings he was grasping right now told him whatever reason brought them Archeos Vitalis and Vacuous Pylos was a very powerful one. So he was dancing with time. And the most critical thing at this time, the devouring and assimilation of the aeonic annals of extremity has exceeded the halfway point, was none other than the plundering of the annals of extremity that supported these existential domains. And alongside that, the encroachment of the Codex of Extremity has exceeded the halfway point. There was also the Codex. Both the Codex and the Annals of Extremity had exceeded the halfway point in their assimilation and encroachment, as this was the direct result of Noah continuing to devour the existential lands below and the Archeos Vitalis Pylos above. Under Vitalis, nothing else remained but the Archeos Vitalis Pylos. Under Vacuous, the Archeos Vacuous Pylos had not yet begun to be devoured, as Noah did not seek for information to spread from there yet. But he was now close to grasping everything right under the noses of his enemies, as in order to accomplish all of this and have enough leeway to move, the defeat of his enemies was paramount. The battle had been in a deadlock before, as the enemies he had faced were actually powerful entities, but the way Noah operated was unique. If he could kill one, the difficulty thereafter became much, much less, as killing the next ones was even easier. Because he devoured the power of those he killed and made it his. Because impossible! Boom! The Dominium soul of a silver-haired Basilius with a furious and deathly expression exploded out as Noah's origin buzzed with annoyance. Don't make too much noise while I'm trying to grasp the weavings of existence. His intent flowed out while streams of prompts cascaded over his eyes. You have obtained the existential armament, neon shield of the Imperium number 99 that is being bathed with the light of quintessence. You have obtained 81x quintessential fruits of existence. You have obtained 77x remnants of a Dominium soul. Loot from the decimation of a Dominium forged over the eons. What Noah saw in terms of prompts of loot was just half of it, as thereafter, he devoured the very weavings of existence of these beings into his own Dominium. From the blood and eons of work of others, it all became his. After the breakdown of the Dominium of Basilius Moraine, it was akin to Noah gaining the methodology to take them all down one by one as the rest would simply follow. So another Basilius of the legacy of Al-Abalam fell as Noah gave them the least amount of attention, moving through the motions while doing his best to grasp the weavings of existence. Yet to the Basilius, Noah's visage now changed to seem like an apathetic demon, as after Basilius Moraine, one Basilius after another began to fall. And the one doing all of this did not bellow out shouts of victory. Nor did he laugh in valor. He impassively threw out Alethian havens filled with a terrifying Dominium, as ever so often, one of the Basilius would seemingly freeze under his pressure as their defenses would be pierced through. It was a hellishly ridiculous scene that the Basilius had never faced before. Archon, a lady of Al-Abalam, cried out her intent in this unwinding reality that made no sense whatsoever, and yet none of it passed through the established Dominium in this space. The only one who answered was the apathetic demon mowing them down. Quintillions of others called out on the lands below, as some had their calls answered. Others are forever gone. You looked at Seed with the same apathy and derision. I give you all a glimpse of this now. The same apathy they looked at others before with. Noah was giving them a sense of this right now as he imposed the pressure of his omniversal emperor lineage on one of them at a time, stopping the movement of their dominions before proceeding to destroy them. The rules of the Imperium are wholly against this. Realize there is nowhere you can go if you keep doing boom. An Alethian haven of dreams smashed onto the Dominium soul of the one talking as the impact shook their existence. Thereafter, the brilliance of infinity erupted as the single Alethian haven smashing into them multiplied to become 81, a heavy hockey of an existential omniversal lineage then descending and constricting everything as the blazing infinity symbol towered over this Basilius, its intent weaving out as everything froze. Fuck the Imperium. Boom! With an interminable glimmer of brilliance, the Dominium became locked down as the 81 Alethian havens pierced through, an endless dream being applied to this entity that they would never wake from. Chapter 2968, Annals Fall. Its bellow boomed out amidst the roiling waves of Vitalis and Vacuous within it. Inside of it, the will of the Codex of Extremity flowed as with the passage of time. It was becoming slower and slower. It was being encroached upon more. Its massive body clashed with the dominium of its target as it observed the undeniable golden eruption of light that extracted its authority and brought it towards its enemy with every flash once more. And its dominium became ever slightly weaker. Its gaze drifted off towards the distance where the subjects of the one who had controlled its weavings to initiate Moore's apocalypse stood. There it could see the bodies of multiple of them, shattered like the endless sands of the Omniverse, their dominiums destroyed and drained of the existential light that made them. Yet another impossibility that the seed it had been tasked to erase the records of had accomplished. It was a tool of the Imperium, as its purpose was the absolute management of the weavings of an existential domain, connecting its annals, extremes, gradations, and records in a smooth manner. And yet at this moment, it was about to fail in its task. This could not be allowed. If the will of the Imperium could not be carried out, the only pathway was destruction. It completed its analysis as it moved right away. What could not be contained in the hands of Imperium had to perish. It had to. Did it really have to? The weavings of the Codex of Extremity seemed to stall momentarily as if it were questioning itself. Did it really have to destroy everything just because the Imperium could not get its hands on it? No, the destruction of existence at such a scale isn't that wise, is it? A voice seemed to ring out within the depths of itself. Feminine in nature, sweet and undeniable in its weavings. Yes. How could destroy simply because the Imperium could not have it? These lands it had overseen all these eons couldn't just be erased like that. Even if the Imperium couldn't have it, there was always the existential omniversal emperor will take care of it. Ah, yes, he would take care of it. In a trance, the potpourri that the Codex of Extremity entranced its will in continued to swing its massive fists, every strike causing its authority to leak out even more. In the very back of its weavings, a part of it seemed to come to a realization. It seemed that the encroachment had already progressed to an irreversible level. The encroachment, was there ever such a thing? It was the Codex of Extremity. Its task was a simple one, to oversee the weavings of all things connected to the existential domains under the great BZT. In the flaming skies of the Archeos Vitalis Pylos that had begun to fracture and disappear, the illusion of the Codex of Extremity was gradually becoming more real. Arcs of quintessential light now covered it as the will of the Codex within the potpourri was slowly coming to understand something new. It was the Codex of Extremity. It was a tool of none other than the existential omniversal emperor. And it was burdened with a glorious purpose. The weavings of annals, extremes, gradations, and records of Vitalis and Vacuous that it always oversaw were flung wide open as any resistance was lost. All of it flowed towards the construct of a single entity. All of it flowed towards the infinite existential omniversal seed, as both this construct and itself were merely tools of the existential omniversal emperor. Boom! With this admittance, with this new reality set, a massive crack split open across the flaming skies of the Archeos Vitalis Pylos, the entire skies above seeming like shards of existence that instantly sunk into their surroundings as if they were being devoured by an unseen force. The glorious citadel of round structures, each varying in size on the cloudy earth below, also began to crumble and sink into oblivion as the few dozen Basilius remaining watching this could only observe with disbelieving dominions at a reality that should in no way be occurring. In the far distance, the massive existential Vitalis and Vacuous potpourri seemingly collected every ounce of authority under it as it bellowed out, throwing a final strike as if it was releasing everything it held forward. And it truly was doing just that as the scene of blinding holding tendrils of light stretching out from the point of impact came to cover its massive body entirely. These tendrils of golden light pulling and absorbing everything about this creature, as in a flash of brilliance. Whap! It entirely disappeared. The only thing left behind was the visage of a bare-chested entity, whose dominium now visibly blazed with transparent white flames, his expression seeming refreshed as he breathed out pure golden flames. Around him, everything was seemingly shattering and disappearing, but with him, within his existential dominium, a surge of indomitable authority was spreading, as even though his body was the one that obtained it, it spread towards his soul and origin, as his existential forge in Alithian havens it received an influx of authority, all stemming from the potpourri. Their purpose was a simple one. The existential omniversal emperor is embarking on the generation and formation of his own fruits of existence. A new dawn. A new point of existence. The extremity of cheats gazes on with anticipation. The extremity of extremity steps out of its silent abode, feeling its authority coursing through all extremes as it actively moves. The extremity of extremity states that the forming fruit of existence has to be of the most extreme tier. The weavings of the existential omniversal emperor were reaching an immeasurable point, and at such a stage, the extremity of the protagonist experiences a surge of existential authority as the prophecy it has put forth is being achieved in real time. Unshackled lands will rise above recorded havens. Annals will fall as an endless weaving awakens. At this moment, the Codex of Extremity whole encroached. What was known as the Aeonic Annals of Extremity began to crumble as everything about it was becoming devoured by the infinite existential omniversal seed. Chapter 2969, Annals Fall. An impossible future was unfolding at this very moment. The weavings of many things were interconnected, as the absence of one may have led to vastly different results. But events unfolded in such a way that at this moment, something as profound as a codex of extremity that was only ever accessible in the hands of the Archon Basilius in existential domain was actually wholly encroached upon. And the entity connected to the Codex of Extremity intimately felt such a change the moment. Outside of the weavings of the existential domain of Vitalis and Vacuous, Archon Basilius al-Abalum burned with terrifying white flames of Vitalis, their lashing tongues and raging singularities caused by his dominion soul, even causing the distant visage of the Imperium Royal Basilius Observer to raise his brows with a smile. This entity truly was a powerful one, as were it not for prophets, they may have chosen to ally with him instead of the leash dog. The entity that at this moment smiled and breathed out his intent. Your existence burns with this much rage openly before you even make a move. Can I take it that you have accepted the result of all this as a foregone conclusion? The raging intent around Al-Abalum was misunderstood. He gazed up with such apathy and cold rage as he shockingly felt his absolute control over the Codex of Extremity being contested at this moment. It meant things had progressed to an irreversible level, as with this under their control, the seed may even be capable of entering the Archeos Vitalis Pylos and controlling the workings of things there, as the damage could be immense. But at the end of the day, if he would lose it all to these dogs before him, he shook his head at the taunt of the leash dog as under the gazes of many beings, his dominion began to move forth along with his intent. Observer, I beseech you again that something critical is occurring within the existential lands behind us, and our presence is required to deal with it. The damage is reaching an irreversible level, as even if you have already acknowledged any and all responsibility to fall on you, I must still do my duty as the Archon Basilius. His words caused many to pause, as they didn't think he was trying to buy time or escape the contests anymore. Basilius Amin had questioning eyes behind him as she sent the weavings of her intent back to the Archeos, Vitalis Pylos, seeking to understand while Archon Basilius al-Abalum was acting. This was when she hadn't heard any drastic news. What is this? The annoyed voice of Archon Basilius Lethith, already in battle mode, reverberated out. Let us finish the contest of strength, and then whatever excuses there are can— What? A booming shout echoed out that stopped all intents. The hundreds of powerful dominiums here belonging to different legacies all turned towards one point where the visage of Archon Basilius Ignatius could be seen. His expression that of anger and a sense of disbelief as he looked towards Al-Abalum. The Archeos Vacuous Pylos is beginning to crumble after the Codex of Extremity made yet another move. Is this occurring in your lands too? Shocking words that finally revealed a semblance of the current reality echoed out. When Al-Abalum heard them, he could only throw back a weaving of disbelief. Archeos Vacuous Pylos was crumbling? What did that even— What? The Codex of Extremity made another move. Al-Abalum, what is happening down there? The voice of the observer boomed out as his gaze became stern. The lands below belonged to the Imperium. He had just sworn in front of the dominiums of hundreds of beings that he would bear responsibility for whatever happened, as he wanted the contests to proceed. But was there actually a larger issue even he didn't know about? The veiled herald of flames and Archon Basilius Lethith looked at each other with stern looks as the gorgeous figure of the veiled herald of flames also weaved her intent. Has another legacy illegally made a move and done something? You should have said this first. It is not another legacy. The gaze of Al-Abalum was icy as his eyes moved around from all beings here. The problem is from within. But when I stated that we were at a critical juncture, I was ignored and told that the responsibility would be on the shoulders of the observer. The problem stems from a corrupted seed. What? The dominiums of the legacy of Lethith and the Royal Basilius Observer blinked as an immense silence descended. Did he just say a seed? There was a problem within his existential domain because of a fucking seed? You're serious? Archon Basilius Lethith asked with a cold gaze as all he received was Al-Abalum's apathetic eyes. The Royal Basilius Observer didn't like this progression currently, as his golden eyes became sharp, his commanding intent booming out. Place everything on hold and ensure the security of the existential lands first. The one who would bear responsibility for all of this spoke as the first entity to move after his words was none other than Archon Basilius Ignatius. But the eyes of three legacies and a royal Basilius observer all turned towards the distant existential domains behind them, as many were wondering, just what damage could a seed have possibly done? The makeup of the existential domains of Vitalis and Vacuous has begun to crumble along the fall of the aeonic annals of extremity. Noah stared at the inflow of prompts as he seemed to be at the end of an existential feast. He was doing many things simultaneously, as within him, his extremes were bubbling with ever-increasing power. Some more so than others, as the protagonist, with its prophecy being accomplished, was on an extremely high stage. But there was one more concept that was flying just as high. It bore its fangs at this point in time, as something moving in the background finally reached completion. One of the reasons why half of the dominiums of the Basilius were absorbed into Noah's own dominion. The incandescent light of loot simmers with unfathomable glory. Existential Analytical Looter has fully analyzed the weavings of Dominium souls for the first time. Chapter 2970, Annals Fall. Existential Analytical Looter. Applying it to those in the existential Dominium realm was extremely hard, until Noah managed to devour entities of this nature. Their breakdown and analysis then came that much faster. The weaving of the makeup of existence, records, and extremes of the soul, dominiums of multiple devoured targets have been analyzed under the feature of existential analytical looter, in the midst of a breaking down reality of existence. As the Archeos Vitalis Pylos crumbled around him, as the last few Basilius of the legacy of Al-Abalin were about to face his judgment, an assortment of existential, multicolored light began to gather as the existential illusory weaving 3 Basilius Moraine will now be called out to work under the banner of the extremity of loot. The existential illusory weaving V3 Basilius Amalusa will now be called out to work under the banner of the extremity of loot. Invisible to others, unaccounted for by the weavings of records in existence. Within the crumbling Archeos Vitalis Pylos, the visage of entities bathed in the light of loot, infinity, quintessence, tyranny, and many other extremes began to rise. The first was the visage of Basilius Amalusa, a gorgeous figure, hair now tinged with a cerulean light, and a purple robe now draping over her as her pupils shone with white gold light. Around her, the transparent white flames of a neonate stage of the existential Dominium realm burned, as truly, a silent assassin of the Dominium realm was born under Noah. The extremity of cheats glances at the extremity loot while shaking its head with glee, emphasizing just how crazy its actions are. Crazy! And how could it be if not crazy? But Noah didn't stop there, as after Basilius Moraine, multiple other lights only seen to him shone as more existential illusory weavings unfolded. The existential illusory weaving 3 existential Vitalis and Vacuous Potpourri will now be called out to work under the banner of the extremity of loot. The existential illusory weaving 3 Basilius Ethro will now be called out to work under the banner of the extremity of loot. One after another, every defeated enemy was analyzed and recreated as each one stupendously held an aura of the neonate stage of the existential dominion realm. Each one, all stemming from the existential analytical looter feature that was spearheaded by loot and supported by many other extremes. Noah stared at the forming army brought forth by this glorious feature as he gave out commands. Finish things up here and raid the Archeos Vacuous Pylos if there is time. If you are discovered, retreat right away. He gave this command while his dominiums began to fade soon after, beginning to disappear entirely from the shattering Archeos Vitalis Pylos, as he had long since observed the weavings of danger. He gave the command for the Archeos Vacuous Pylos because if these existential domains were a map he was clearing out, he sadly didn't have a 100% completion rate, as the Archeos Vacuous Pylos wasn't entirely devoured at this point, nor did he get to grace the Basilius of Ignatius with his presence. But he followed the weavings of information he received from his distinctions as the Weaver of Extremity and Weaver of Existence. Everything about him instantly disappeared from these lands as the few basileus remaining in the surroundings breathed out as if a heavy weight was lifted off their shoulders. They gazed at the destruction around them with ashen expressions, but before they could even enjoy this momentary relief, the sole dominium of a basileus distorted and became flattened along with his body out of nowhere, the enemy being something he couldn't even see as the massive fist of the illusory weaving Va-3, existential vitalis and vacuous potpourri, moved the fastest. The brief respite the few remaining basileus felt was soon erased, as before they could even wonder what was happening, silent and unseen attacks arrived all around them as their fate was already sealed. Noah's dominiums returned to the infinite existential omniversal seed where his sole dominium was as everything merged back into one. Sitting on the multicolored throne that seemed connected to all the authorities across this omniversal seed, Noah gained a small glimpse of the shocking changes occurring. Just what an immense gain would bloom from the devouring of the gradations, annals, domains, records, and everything else of an entire existential domain. In the encroached codex of extremity, I am pulling as much of it towards us as I can, Master. But the dominium it is connected with is too advanced in its realm, we likely won't be able to obtain the codex in its entirety. The manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed released its intent as when Noah gazed above him, in the endless multicolored skies, he could see the illusory flashing glimmer of a massive white book, of a codex of extremity. It's okay, let's be ready to make our exit depending on the situation. Yes, Master, everything is ready. The infinite existential omniversal seed nodded in affirmation. A tremendous set of things were occurring all at once, as both it and Noah had to manage and analyze swaths of information in a matter of nanoseconds, but they moved towards the most optimum paths. Even at this very moment, Noah was observing the beginnings of the production of fruits of existence within his infinite existential forge and Elythian havens, all the while understanding the changes of his dominiums, extremes, the existential imperium exchange, and even the terrifying formation of his existential illusory weavings of his enemies that was occurring in real time. But even all of this seemed to pale in comparison to what his infinite existential omniversal seed had to do at this moment. They had eaten up a lot. They now needed to make a clean break and digest everything as they learned about this wider landscape they were finding themselves in. And this new phase was kicked off grandly as a new prompt dawned before Noah. The quintessential annals of extremity have fully devoured the aeonic annals of extremity. The weavings of the annals of Vitalis and Vacuous have fallen. Your fable is arriving at a critical juncture. Chapter 2971, An Endless Weaving, 1. A number of glorious things were occurring all at once. It seemed like the weavings of multiple destinies had already clashed as the results unfolded now, with Noah's destiny undoubtedly being at the very center as one by one, the fruits of his labor unveiled themselves. The quintessential gradations of extremity are being forged within the quintessential annals of extremity. The weavings of records, extremes, and existence of all entities within the infinite existential omniversal seed are connected with the forming gradations and annals. The infinite existential omniversal seed is transforming into a unique existential domain unbound by common restrictions and limitations. The absolute reality of an existential domain being anchored in the weavings of existence and non-existence does not apply to the infinite existential omniversal seed. Yes, there were many fruits showing themselves, but the ones brought up at the very forefront were those that could be of direct and immediate aid to their goals. And one was something of dire need if they wished to keep all the accomplishments here. The feature of existential domain warping is now available for use. A dazzling new capability bloomed. An absolute rule that Noah didn't even give a moment of time to was violated. All existential domains were anchored where they were born, with the Imperium working for eons to barely manage moving them. Yet Noah achieved such a feat in such a short period of time that it was best if the researchers of the Imperium never found out about such a feat. And the moment it was achieved, let's get ready to make a clean break. Noah's intent weaved out towards the infinite existential omniversal seed. the rows of prompts about himself and this construct continuing to descend. Outside the weavings of what was known as the Vitalis and Vacuous existential domains, the Archon Basilius Lethe and a few members of his legacy watched coldly as over half of all Basilius of Al-Abal and Ignatius disappeared into the domains ahead of them. They couldn't yet step foot on it, as this was not yet their domain, and it would be a clear declaration of war for another legacy to enter a dominium unless invited. So they could only wait, as the only exception to this was the royal Basilius observer who left with Al-Abalam and Ignatius. His massive existential vessels now showed rows of attendants stepping out into the sudden complexity of the situation, their dominiums all buzzing with power as they all exceeded the neonate stage of the existential dominion realm. Archon Basilius Lethe gazed forth coldly as the veiled herald of flames came by his side and whispered sweet glory. Whatever issue they have with a seed is of no consequence to our conquest. Vacuous and Vitalis are just the next we add to our tally. Just imagine the others we can afford to conquer after another eon. Our legacy will be among those carrying the most respect within the Imperium, to the extent that we will stand side by side with even the most powerful royal Basilius. Her words showed a hint of their burning ambition as the eyes of Archon Basilius Lethe twisted into a smile. After dealing with whatever issue they've concocted, these lands will be ours. There is only that little issue with that Anine. Deals were made behind the scenes as they had to be honored. But none of this would matter when the prize was an existential domain with an existential extremity of a beginning and an end. No more excuses after this, only glory. Their eyes were bright with the light of conquest as they stared at the distant lands, and within these lands themselves, inside the Archeos Vitalis Pylos, brilliance unfolded as Archon Basilius Al-Abalam, Basilius Anine, other Basilius of their legacy, and the golden-haired royal Basilius Observer all appeared within the weavings of this space. And the moment they appeared, their dominiums were faced with an unimaginable scene. The white flaming skies above had all but crumbled. The cloudy earth below that was a serene, paradisiacal landscape was torn to shreds as a glorious citadel had all but perished into nothingness. Their surrounding reality didn't even have the weavings of existence, as if they weren't really within an existential domain. The gaze of Al-Abalam was extremely ugly, as even though he had a glimpse of what was happening, he didn't know it had progressed to this extent. This was him. But the other Basilius that held no connection to the Codex of Extremity and the Imperium Royal Basilius Observer, who were just facing this at face value. What? A booming intent reverberated out as it was from none other than Basilius Anine, her beautiful features distorted as she looked around her as if she had lost something extremely close to her. While the other Basilius were dumbfounded, Archon Basilius Al-Abalam and the Imperium Royal Basilius Observer had spread their dominions out, Al-Abalam instantly disappearing from their current position as he saw a single remaining Basilius of his lineage on the thread of death. And even though he couldn't see the enemy that was causing it, he could see something. Boom! His dominium crashed down as he felt it impact another, the opposing dominium becoming flattened into nothingness within an instant, as Al-Abalam was simply that terrifying. His gaze was filled with a heavy cloud as he then grasped the only remaining Basilius of his legacy left behind, as he asked in a grave tone, "What happened here?" The question shook the Basilius, who was feeling waves of relief from being saved, and yet his eyes trembled as if he were traumatized, only saying two simple words: "Noah. Osman." The words caused Archon Basilius Al-Abalam to have an even darker gaze while in the distance. Basilius Anine's face twisted into an utterly ferocious expression. As for the Imperium Royal Basilius Observer, he appeared in the depths of the shattered flaming skies, reaching out towards a barely visible visage of a massive illusory white codex. Chapter 2972, An Endless Weaving. 2. The Imperium Royal Basilius Observer reached out and grasped the glimmer that remained of the codex, his expression stern as his intent apathetically rang out. "You had the Codex of Extremity activate War's Apocalypsis this whole time? An issue with a seed progressed to this extent? Why didn't you provide clear details initially?" With every word, his expression revealed hints of more and more anger as down below, Alabalam gazed up coldly while replying. I was never given the chance. The observer seemed to be in a hurry to see the results of the rule of Imperium Telos against me. The words caused a simmering rage to rise within the golden eyes of the observer as he used a unique authority, what remained of the Codex of Extremity falling in his hands, as his expression became even more obscene. He grasped the few tattered pages and then pointed down below, past the shattered clouds of earth, and onto the domain where they couldn't see anything due to the Moor's apocalypsis being in process. With a tap of his fingers, a veil was cracked forcefully as the scene down below became visible. As the vastness of the existential vitalist hyperversal domain became visible, and what they saw caused a shocking silence to permeate across all the existential dominium realm entities here. This was because there was an absence of existence, an absence of any domain. Nothing relating to Vitalis could be seen down below. In this silence, whap! The weavings of reality fluctuated as the figure of Archon Basilius Ignatius appeared while booming out with his intent. The Archeos Vacuus Pylos was partly destroyed. How is his pupils dilated? He thought the damage within his Archeos Vacuus Pylos was extensive. He even destroyed the dominiums of two invisible entities that were actually devouring his Basilius before he came over. But what he saw of the Vitalis Pylos caused his words to never finish. Up above, the visage of the observer shifted from anger to apathy as he voiced out while piecing together the last remnants of the Codex of Extremity. No seed can manage to cause this much destruction. No seed can proceed not to just destroy, but to cause the disappearance of large swathes of existential domains. You came across a seed that was influenced by omniversal pillagers, and you did not know it. Boom. His words were absolute, as if they were weaving a new reality. After all, he had claimed to take all responsibility on this issue, as he couldn't get back to the Imperium and state that one of their lands had been destroyed right under his nose. Omniversal pillagers was the root cause of this. Understood? His visage pulsed with purple-gold brilliance as he looked down on all Basilius here, Alabalam's cold figure about to reply when crack! Stemming from the weavings of what used to be an existential domain below and the destroyed lands above, in the absence of annals, gradations, or any source that would keep this sliver of existence together, its natural destruction began. Boom! What remained of the existential vacuous and vitalis hyperversal domains began to crumble as Archon Basilius Ignatius roared out, returning back to his lands as he truly couldn't stand losing everything. But what could one do? In front of an imploding existential domain, it was an irreversible force of nature that one could only bear or escape from. Boom! Existential destruction began to unfold as in the Archeos Vacuus Pylos. Ignatius roared out while pulling in portions of his past domain, his Basilius, and the throngs of dicasties of extremity remaining. All of them flowed towards his own dominium in this moment of profound destruction and loss. And amongst those entering his dominium through his own permission, their dicasties of extremity all flashed with a silent blue light. A light that had already begun to silently meld into some Basilius, and at this moment, an Archon Basilius took it into his own dominium to save what was his. It was an astounding progression of events, and a terrifying possibility for the will of the great usurper silently spreading and infecting everything. Boom! The fracturing of existence was immense as it could not be contained, where even those outside would be privy to it. In the next few moments, the visage of the observer with a cold expression appeared in front of his existential vessel, his attendants bowing down at his entry, as in the distance, the figures of Archon Basilius Lithi and the veiled Herald of Flames could be with their jaws opening wide in shock. Even from where they stood, they could see the fracturing of the existential domain in the distance. It was followed by the dazzling Basilius within the legacies of Alabalam and Ignatius being spat out as well, the unfolding situation being one that nobody could fathom. The only one able to exert their authority in this moment was none other than the Imperium Royal Basilius Observer, the weavings of this entity echoing out to all Basilius in the surroundings. The machinations of omniversal pillagers succeeded here today. Archon Basilius Lithith heard this as his dominium buzzed. What the fuck did he mean by the machinations of omniversal pillagers? What omniversal pillagers? If they really passed through here, all of them would be dead, as this region was not one that they could even step into. Did Al-Abalam really destroy his existential domain not to let him have it? Did. The means of omniversal pillagers are nefarious as this time. They utilized a corrupted seed known as Noah Osmont. Track this seed down, and he will lead us to the true culprits. Wah! The dominium of Lethith blazed. What the fuck were they even talking about now? Did they not realize how many of his resources he had directed for this venture? How many tributes he had to give to invite the observer here? And now they were just gonna fuck him over like this? His dominium was burning with rage, but he couldn't even release it as he looked at the form gaze of the observer that showed what he said was final. Archon Basilius Lethith didn't know that he was just one of the entities here swimming in rage and regret. There was one whose rage and regret far surpassed any others here, and it was none other than the gorgeous visage of Basilius Anini that now stood amongst the throngs of Basilius behind Al-Abalam, all of them gazing with dark eyes towards the fracturing shell of an existential domain in the distance. Her dominium was seething so much that her eyes trembled, a single thought ringing inside her over and over again. I let him go, I let him go, I let him go! Over and over again, endlessly. Chapter 2973, An Endless Weaving. I let him go. Such a thought repeated within the shaky dominium of Anane as the weavings of existence were ultimately all made up of choices. The weavings of the choices of all beings here were ultimately what led to the current reality. But some truly could not accept it. They had done so much. They had plotted for so many years. And for others like Al-Abalam, they had just lost the home to their legacy. One's legend and the legend of their legacy was determined by their capability to generate wealth. Existential domains were one of the main methods to generate wealth, as a legacy that had lost their existential domain may as well lose tier status as a legacy, unless they could accumulate their wealth again through more dangerous means than when compared to existential domains. Or if they had the capability to start up an enclave and produce niche products to be sold in the existential Imperium exchange. Ultimately, it was all about wealth and resources. And on this day, barring any entities whose plans and weavings went to waste, the single entity that had lost every ounce of his wealth was none other than Al-Abalam. Blazing silver-white brilliance covered his body as his dominium felt Vitalis closely. He still held and felt this existential extreme, but he could no longer feel the sense of absolute control with it, to the extent that any others using this authority could be suppressed by him. He had lost the right of its control, as he now shared no connection to Vitalis itself, the codex of extremity above it, or any of its weavings. He now had to depend on his other existential extremes, and not the one he had focused so many winds of resources into. A tremendous loss. This was what Al-Abalam faced, as at this moment, his mind only held a single name repeated over and over again. Noah Osmont. A single name was uttered out, thought about, and questioned about at this moment, as multiple legacies and a man of the Imperium stared at a crumbling existential domain, a distance away from this area, in the midst of the endless absence of existence that was represented by immeasurable darkness. Multiple pairs of eyes were covered by a dominium blazing with a wondrous purple light were watching on with cold interest. Adorned in crystalline scales, they had forms most similar to eonic existential gold dragons, their visages dangerous and filled with power, as the purple hue around their dominiums rivaled that of Al-Abalam and other Archon Basilius. There were 3 of these massive entities, and yet above one of them was a woman robed in a white existential armament, her body burning with a fearsome light as she actually sat atop beings such as this. And even with their massive sizes and terrifying power, being not too far away in distance, neither the observer nor the archons of the 3 respective legacies could sense nor see them. At the sight of the crumbling existential domain, the draconian entity that the gorgeous visage of a woman sat on sharpened its gaze as its intent weaved out. We managed to see something unique, Sanctus Princess. Following a dog of the Imperium in these lands actually showed them blatantly destroying an existential domain. Shall we make a move to eradicate? to avenge the countless lives they have soullessly taken just now? The words were callous and filled with immense malice, and yet the woman atop this draconic entity stroked its scales calmly. Her white robe glimmered with brilliance as verdant hair fell to her shoulders, her endlessly green eyes serpentine in nature, as her dominium also radiated a purple light, a light commonly associated 2 stages after the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm. On her forehead, the scripture glowed in a gorgeous verdant light as this dazzling woman replied to the powerful existential dominium realm entity below her. We must not believe everything at face value. Some of them emanated weavings placing the blame on omniversal pillagers, others on one called Noah Osmont. Sanctus Princess, they don't know the first thing regarding omniversal pillagers. If even a single one passed through here, not even a shred of our bones would remain, much less theirs. Blatant falsehoods. Words were exchanged by the woman termed Sanctus Princess and the entity she mounted as she calmly nodded. Yes, so it's either them or this Noah Osmont. Kidnap a few and scour their dominiums before making a move. Don't make a move on the Dog of Imperium just yet. The Sanctus Empress has handed down a decree to all of us Sanctus Princesses that we are moving covertly without causing any open conflicts with the Imperium in this coming eon. Also, did any of you feel anything out of place seconds ago? Her eyes glimmered with brilliance as she asked the 3 entities below her, all 3 giving her quizzical glances as the one she mounted replied, "No, Sanctus Princess." Her green eyes shone serenely as her intent weaved out. Just for an instant, I caught the weavings of the transference of existence, as if something massive was transferred a vast distance in an instant. My dominium is pulling me to follow up on this. I may be able to trace whatever it was. Her words were astonishing as the eyes of those below her glanced at each other before the one she stood atop of nodded. Then, I will follow your lead and let Knight Judar and Knight Arbun follow the Peens of Legacies and the Dog of the Imperium here, and avenge the lives that ended so senselessly. Salus Populi Suprema Lex Esto. The Sanctus Princess called out lightly, her intent this time being filled with an unfathomable power, as a set of words holding great meaning were uttered. Her dominium and the dominium of the 3 entities around her burned with an ever fiercer glint as they replied in kind. Salus Populi Suprema Lex Esto. Salus Populi Suprema Lex Esto. A set of words that represented an immense power, a set of words that meant the good of the people was the supreme law. Chapter 2974, An Endless Weaving. E4. Salus Populi Suprema Lex Esto. The good of the people was the supreme law. Such a maxim was uttered out while weavings were read and delegated. The Sanctus Princess patted the draconian entity below her as they disappeared into a verdant light right away. The remaining 2 draconic entities turning their massive bodies and gazes towards the legacies of Al-Abalim, Ignatius, and Lethith as they were none the wiser. These entities were unique ones that belonged to a terrific power within this omniverse, a power only known as the Sanctus Populi, those who stood to reclaim the dignity of the masses, those who put the welfare of people above all else. Like so, an intricate weaving began to form, a dance began to ebb and flow, and at the center of it all was a man. An emperor born and reborn through countless fires of quintessence as now, he could finally gain a brief moment of respite to understand the power he held, and just what existence meant for him, who had pioneered into the existential dominium realm, forged an omniversal lineage, and had his construct take the steps to become an infinite existential omniversal seed. Across the blank expanse of the omniverse, an area so endlessly vast that even with the passage of eons, it was hard to say if one had ever caught a glimpse of its end. Throughout the omniverse, across the swathes of non-existence, there would always be points of existence stretched throughout. Existential domains. Massive pockets of existence that held the weavings and records of an uncountable number of creatures in each one, with the lives of trillions sometimes not knowing about the quintillions of others, stretched out in the same existential domains. Some live and die believing they were contained within a small world rotating around a sun in a distant galaxy. Others may touch upon mana and come to observe a much grander viewpoint. Others could view things at a scale of the universe, cosmos, or even planes of existence. And those truly lucky, or through sheer hard world, may even have touched upon the gradations of extremity. Each existential domain was unique as it may have its own weavings of existence, records, and gradations. The powers and concepts entities from one existential domain wielded may be vastly different compared to entities in another existential domain. Even the gradations of extremity they climbed may not be the same. Even the dominiums they formed may not be the same. Across this endless omniverse, in a point of immense silence and nothingness, whap! A singularity bloomed and illuminated everything nearby with multicolored brilliance before an instant later, this brilliance retracted as if it never existed. The singularity that had just warped in glimmered silently before also disappearing. Existential domain warping was successfully completed. The prompt was among the many that thundered before Noah's eyes as his dominium sorted through eons worth of memories of Basilius of the legacies of Al-Abalim and Ignatius. As his dominium sorted across the changes of his omniversal lineage, as his dominium sorted through the existential Imperium exchange. He was sorting through many things while confirming with his own weavings that he had made a clean escape. And during this whole time, the infinite existential omniversal seed assimilated its gains of swallowing up nearly all parts of a unique existential domain. The results were massive. The weavings of the Codex of Extremity have fallen entirely under the will of the infinite existential omniversal seed. The quintessential gradations of extremity are being formed as the weavings of the Codex of Extremity are studied and applied. The infinite existential omniversal seed was now of tremendous size as its scale was nothing compared to mere minutes ago. Eating up nearly the entirety of an existential domain provided such results. But at the very peak of this construct, the illusion of a codex appeared, its pages painted with an incandescent array of colors. The Codex of Extremity was a tool, a type of construct that allowed the Imperium to manage existential domains in unique ways and produce results of farming fruits of existence over endless eons. But at this moment, the infinite existential omniversal seed is modifying the weavings of the Codex of Extremity. The Codex of Extremity is modifying the weavings of the attachment and flow of records, existence, and extremes of the infinite existential omniversal seed. As of this moment, the infinite existential omniversal seed embarks on a path of unfathomable glory. The incandescent throne Noah sat on became even more brilliant as the figure of the manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed rose from her kneeling position, her whole figure radiating multicolored light in the unique domain only Noah could enter, as she shouted out a boom of magisterial glory. The quintessential gradations of extremity were already being formed. The Codex of Extremity was being modified. But the infinite existential omniversal seed didn't stop there, because it truly held too much at this moment. The annals of Vacuus and Vitalis are being burned. An unknown authority that made the naturally occurring Vacuus and Vitalis existential and allowed for the formation of their domains is being burned and utilized as fuel. The infinite existential omniversal seed surpasses any common existential domain, and yet it doesn't have a defining existential extremity authority. A daring prompt came that forced Noah to give more of his focus on this side. His dominiums buzzed. The throne he sat on buzzed as a feedback of information flowed. His will and the will of the infinite existential omniversal seed resonated. The manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed brought its widespread hands onto its chest, as if it was clasping interminable concentrations of authority, this whole region becoming bathed with potent existential authority. The infinite existential omniversal seed has many defining authorities, but one shall take the first step. Manadynamics steps forward from the very essence of the infinite existential omniversal seed, from Noah's multicolored throne, from the endless stretches of expanding Elythian havens and extremity vein. A gorgeous, unfiltered, blazing cerulean glow bloomed. Chapter 2975, An Endless Weaving 5, Manadynamics. There were an endless variety of existential extremity authorities that could be the basis of an existential domain. The infinite existential omniversal seed, in conjunction with Noah, chose Manadynamics to be the one. And it would not be the only. But at this moment, its brilliance outshone all others, as it was already intricately connected to the infinite existential omniversal seed, Noah. And yet at this moment, its influence tremendously increased, to the extent that even the Alethean heavens and extremity vein became painted by a gorgeous blue light. To the extent that Noah felt his body begin to tremble as deep within him, mana dynamics began to flow like a torrential beast, one that was so fierce to the extent that even his dominium trembled. It wasn't that he couldn't personally support another existential extremity authority, with his 3 separate dominiums having grown in real time to be capable of elevating and holding strong even with another authority. But mana dynamics felt so endlessly vast as its true anchor was the infinite existential omniversal seed itself. It was something meant to support the workings of such a construct. And when it began to course through Noah, it didn't alter or modify itself on his behalf. It ran through him as if it were running through the infinite existential omniversal seed. Whom his dominium creaked as it wasn't just a matter of a new existential extremity authority. It was the ridiculous concentration and quantity of it as the weavings of mana becoming existential were too profound for Noah, he who held infinite mana. The raging explosion of such an endless concept charged throughout him as his existential dominions felt as if they were being squeezed, as if his meridians were too narrow, as if the circuits and vessels carrying authority throughout Noah could not support it. And in response, the existential omniversal emperor lineage wakes with a challenging glare towards the immeasurable waves of mana dynamics. The meridians of the existential omniversal emperor can support the flow of any authority. Boom! His body instantly flashed with countless interconnecting meridians as the raging waves of existential logic quickly stabilized and found a flow. But this wasn't all. There was still such a massive amount of it as it had to be put to use. The dominiums of the existential omniversal emperor are filled with boundless stanchions of light and interconnected passages that can direct and transform all forms of authority. The existential omniversal extremity passages are already rising from the backbone of the quintessential reality passage, connecting everything across your dominiums, your forge, and your Alethean havens. Within his body, boundlessly large, multicolored, mountainous passages flashed, immense and interminable waves of authority beginning to course through them seamlessly as they seemed to cycle and direct the flow of the endless waves of existential mana. This was a glimpse within Noah on how he was managing it. Now, the infinite existential omniversal seed, it didn't even need to manage any. It let it run rampant. And this was why a moment later, the figure of the manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed in front of Noah had countless lines of blue rivers connecting to her, the authority of mana dynamics flowing entirely into her and coursing into her hand as the existential authority of a past natural law that served as the building blocks of the current infinite existential omniversal seed flows with an intentful weaving. Mana dynamics asserts once more that the essence of existence, extremes, and records cannot be created nor destroyed, simply changed into different forms. Through the infinite existential omniversal seed, mana dynamics courses across the weavings of its records, extremes, and existence as it begins changing its endless authority towards the generation of quintessential fruits of existence. Boom! In this dazzling region, where only Noah and the manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed were, heavy booms could be heard as massive mountainous passages of pure authority formed all around, each one looking like an inverted volcanic mountain gushing out waves of cerulean light that serenely flowed all around. It clustered on the manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed, and coursed through her as from her outstretched hands fantastical framework of a fruit of existence began to form. This scene was a wondrous one to see, as Noah observed that after a second passed, the framework of a fruit similar to a paradisiacal apple was already formed. And after 10 seconds passed, its radiant insides began to fill up. ZT! All around, the mountains of existential omniversal extremity passages gushed out endless blue light that continued to only contribute to this, and after 30 seconds, the different layers of the fruit of existence were outlined. After 50 seconds, the fruit seemed nearly complete as an outer multicolored layer began to cover it. And after 60 seconds, hum! An incandescent light blared as a dazzling, quintessential fruit of existence formed in the hands of the manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed. 60 seconds. After the passage of another second, the fruit in her hands was pushed away as another began to form. As of this moment, the infinite existential omniversal seed can generate one quintessential fruit of existence per minute, and in an endless manner through the weavings of manodynamics. This rate of convergence will only increase over time, as the inclusion of even more relevant existential extremity authorities onto the infinite existential omniversal seed will only hasten it. Dazzling words cascaded down, and they let it be known that every minute a quintessential fruit of existence would be born in the infinite existential omniversal seed. In an hour, that was 60 quintessential fruits of existence. In a day, that was 1,440. And this was just the infinite existential omniversal seed. There was still Noah himself, as dazzling mountainous passages gushed out waves of authorities in his dominiums. Above Noah's Alethian haven of dreams within his existential origin dominium, a golden fruit began to form a dazzling and frightening outline. A unique fruit of existence has begun to form within your Alethian haven of dreams. Chapter 2976, An Endless Weaving. V6, another unique fruit of existence formed above a golden haven of his, and this was on top of a current output of 1,440 quintessential fruits of existence a day from the infinite existential omniversal seed. As this began, a unique fruit of existence had begun to form within your Alethian haven of helios. A unique fruit of existence had begun to form within your Alethian haven of quantum. A unique fruit of existence begun to form within your forge, within his havens, within his forge. The backbone of fruits of existence began to form. But he wasn't something as massive as the infinite existential omniversal seed. The progression of his fruits of existence was a little slower, as even after 30 seconds passed, they were not even halfway done. But nonetheless, they were forming. It was a reality that very few entities could say they witnessed in the eons that passed or were capable of doing it themselves, especially if it was someone in the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm. And with it occurring, the analysis of the fruits of existence under existential analytical looter has increased greatly. Your dominium has begun producing genuine fruits of existence as you turn your existence into something capable of a profound action. Your extremes support your heavy path. Your fable stands strong enough to support such existential shattering actions. Many authorities within you are budding waves of existential extremity authorities and increased elevation in their status. The weavings of the extremity of the hero flourish with brilliance as they garnered enough support from quintillions upon quintillions of existence that were saved from extinction, accumulating concentrated seas of authority that can be transformed into at least 1,000 quintessential fruits of existence through your dominium. All those who looked upon your existence as one that saved them have been recorded in the fable of the hero. Existences sharing a unique fate or destiny have been highlighted. The endless amounts of people he saved within the vacuous and vitalist existential domains. They bore literal fruits from his endeavors as the prompts continued. The weavings of the extremity of the villain flourish with brilliance as they garnered enough support from many entities with high levels of existence that considered you the bane of their existence, one who has destroyed everything they have built along with their weavings of existence. The weavings of the extremity of the villain have accumulated concentrated seas of authority that can be transformed into at least 2,000 quintessential fruits of existence through your dominium. All those who looked upon your existence as the bane of theirs have been recorded in the fable of the villain. Those with the greatest capabilities to stand in your way have been highlighted. Within him, a scripture containing the fable of the villain unfolded as waves of information flowed from it, those who considered him a great enemy. At the top of the list currently, there were some unique names. 1. Archon Basilius al-Abalam. 2. Basilius Anine. 3. Archon Basilius Ignatius. 4. Archon Basilius Lethith. 5. Royal Basilius Observer. There were many who considered him a great enemy, as just in the top 5. 3 were archons who led legacies. But none of this caused Noah to fear as he lingered on the name Basilius Anine for a moment, thinking of the woman who made a choice not too long ago. And as he thought about his enemies, The weavings of those who stand against the existential omniversal emperor must be eradicated. A heavy intent reverberated out within Noah's mind, with this intent actually stemming out from beings connected to him. A part of his will flashed to observe a scene near a transforming existential omniversal blacksmith's forge. Here, dozens of existential illusory weavings floated powerfully as they stared at the depths of the blacksmith's forge, where the outlines of massive existential automatons were coming to fruition. Around this region, magisterial, existential, omniversal extremity passages pointed down and gushed out authority endlessly that flowed towards the dominiums of the invisible army of Noahs, with some even going to the illusory weavings of the Mimesthais he had destroyed and analyzed. The intent wishing to destroy his enemies stemmed from them while their very existence was being strengthened, while they were being pumped and restructured with mana dynamics at their base, along with the infusion of other existential extremity authorities. This was just one side of the infinite existential omniversal scene in Noah, with there being so many to pay attention to as regarding the intent thrown out by his invisible army. Not quite yet. Noah sent a command back as he brought a majority of his will back towards his visage on the throne. He had to. Because even as fruits of existence were now being produced and generated every minute, mana dynamics did not stop there. The infinite existential omniversal seed did not stop there. Noah's dominiums pulsed as they felt something shocking forming. His rousing will pulled towards the newly forming quintessential gradations of extremity that even he hadn't perused through yet. How vastly did they change the progression across the gradations of extremity compared to the vitalis and vacuous hyperversal domains? Compared to the Great Imperium? He didn't get a chance to even answer this question yet, as above these very quintessential gradations of extremity, boom! The foundations of something even more ecstatic began to form, powered by the endless authority of mana dynamics. Its authority that stated it could change forms of authorities into something it wished. At this moment, it carried the blazing authority of the fallen annals of extremity, of the weavings of devoured existential domains as its result. The infinite existential dominium sky is being forged, set to be above the quintessential gradations of extremity, set for those in the existential dominium realm. Across the omniverse, it was known that there wasn't a cap on how far one could grow their dominion. It was an endless process. Countless fruits of existence were devoured, as no entity has found a cap on their progression. And on this day, an entity newly born in the existential omniverse began forming a construct of an infinite existential dominium sky that would propel him across this endless weaving of progression. As he embarked on this endless weaving of existence that many others had already stepped on over the eons, on this day the infinite existential dominium sky was being formed as from it, an endless weaving awakened. Chapter 2977, An Infinite Sky, 1. An endless weaving of power, grace, essence, and much more. Other existences had their own version of this, their own progression. But did Noah always have to conform? Did he have to bend to what they decided was the existential dominion realm, its boundaries and limitations? Or could he simply just create his own? Before he took down the few Basilius of the legacy of Al-Abalim and obtained eons worth of common sense of the Imperium, he had already done something that entities like them would consider crazy and inefficient by equally distributing existential authority equally between his three dominiums. Common sense for them was to seek a single dominium and not divide one's resource between three, with this sense actually being true for the most part. Someone who ate 1,200 fruits of existence and placed them all towards their dominium souls would be capable of expressing much greater power than someone who gave 400 fruits of existence to all three of their dominiums. They would be equally weaker in all three as against the one who gave everything to a single aspect and elevated it to a higher level. It was nothing complex, and this method was true and tried over eons. This was why the masses conformed to it. But was this same common sense applicable to Noah, with his fruits of existence, with his lineage, with his foundation? As he felt the fruits of existence forming throughout his earthly havens and forge, Noah's will buzzed with his extremes as he proceeded on his own path. What others deemed impossible was merely something deserving a nod of his head and a wave of his hands. He would forge his own path. Let us see this dominium sky. His intent echoed out, and the extremity of quintessence throws their support towards the infinite existential dominium sky. The extremity of infinity throws their support towards the infinite existential dominium sky. The extremity of cheats throws their unflinching support towards the infinite existential dominium sky. One extreme after another. Their intent flowed along with Noah as they added in the construction of the infinite existential dominium sky. Above the quintessential gradations of extremity, an endless sky was forged. Let us see its beginnings. Noah rose from his throne as, unlike the waters of the gradations of extremity, where only a manifestation of himself could appear within, since he held his tremendous authority, and this construct was under the control of the infinite existential omniversal seed. He could appear they both directly and with a manifestation of his existence. He took a step, and he disappeared, only to reappear in a splendorous new space. The weavings of many extremes seemed to be acting as the building blocks, with the fallen source of the existential domains, records, annals, and extremes of vitalus and vacuous also being crumbled and recycled as the fuel. All around, the authorities weaved into transparent white tendrils that formed symbols of infinity. These weavings stretching out like endless rivers towards an endless sky whose end was not close to being decided. The moment Noah arrived, waves of prompts came as he felt the extremes within his body come to life. You have utilized your absolute authority over the infinite existential omniversal seed to appear in the infinite existential dominium sky. It is a unique domain to cultivate one's dominiums to their fullest, with the effectiveness of all tools of existence assimilated into one's dominiums, increasing by 3 times while in this space. The early stages of the infinite existential dominium sky are demarcated by a characteristic white brilliance that others refer to as the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm. As the master of this space, you can choose to declare this stage with this same distinction or another, with its upper tier being something influenced by you, as it can vastly exceed what others commonly know to be the neonate stage. Still under construction with its full features yet to be unveiled, but another one of its most distinct features is making it possible for the extremes within one's dominium to be stimulated to a quintessential extent that one's extremes become actualized outside of their bodies. Such an action would already require a deep understanding of the extremes within one's existence, with very few entities at the neonate stage capable of this, and with existential extremity authorities being the only ones with a high level of strength to even express a sliver of their sentience outwardly. A unique prompt came as finally Noah understood why he felt like his extremes were becoming much more active. It was a rare feat, not even feasible for those in the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm. And yet the moment Noah arrived, his immense understanding of the desires and intents of his extremes that he was already allowing to run free by expressing themselves, they began to bud and bloom. His body began to pulse with arcs of multicolored hockey as soon it felt like smoke was rising from his body. It was heavy and thick, with the first one being colorless as it was none other than quintessence. The gorgeous dominium sky trembled as above, and a thick, colorless essence arose like smoke from Noah's body, and rose above him to form a smoky visage of himself, but with a touch of extra glory and honor as it gazed up at the dominium sky, an actualization of his extreme, different from the past reified forms of his extremes, with these concepts now being bound to him as to an extent they were him. They couldn't be extricated so easily, as it was akin to pulling a part of himself away, but quintessence became actualized at this moment, as it wasn't the only one. Woo! A moment later, an endlessly thick smoke arose from him, another visage similar to him, but looking extremely cold. The reified form of infinity appeared as the gorgeous cerulean light began to cover the white hues all around. Existential might emanated off of these reified forms with glory as they truly were just the first. Chapter 29:78, An Infinite Sky. After quintessence and infinity, blazing purple waves of glorious smoke rose from Noah one after another, and his existential extremes manifested outwardly. Tyranny arose with heavy splendor as a burly visage of Noah with an expression of pride and power appeared. A dazzling purple crown floating above his head as he gazed calmly at infinity and quintessence. After that, a golden brilliance rose as a halcyon visage of Noah, exactly as he rose and looked at all others with its eyes raised. It was the protagonist. And not a beat later, another golden light rose as the visage of Lut appeared. And this was just too unique as a manifestation of Noah, adorned with golden rings of bracelets filled with precious stones around his hands, a necklace that seemed to be connected with golden fruits of existence, and golden rivers of swirling diamond-encrusted fruits of existence flowed around his whole smoky body. He looked like a wealthy emperor from ancient times, as even his eyes were gazing around shiftily for any signs of loot. Thereafter, the manifestation of his origin appeared as a glaring infinity symbol with swirling havens. A burly visage of his body also made an appearance, and his soul that looked most like his actual body, quintessence, also made an appearance. Thereafter, obsidian smoke gathered. The dominium sky once more trembled, and from the ashes rose the visage of the existential extremity of extremity. It seemed shrouded in mystery and valor, its whole body wrapped by a thick veil as it joined the heavy circle of manifestations of existential authorities around Noah. Above his head, it felt like parts of himself had simply risen up and were looking at each other with their own unique personalities. Quintessence was about to begin expressing its intent when all of a sudden, another endlessly blue light boomed from Noah as a dominating visage of manadynamics bloomed, expanded by the infinite existential omniversal seed, but still part of Noah's existential extremity authorities. Its eyes felt like they were filled with a boundless sea of light, as the pressure it emanated was immeasurably heavy and suffocating. If any other entities were here, they may be crushed by the weight of the existential extremity authorities manifesting here, as they were simply that heavy. And now they all looked at each other. Vitalis and Vacuous were excluded, as Noah had not fully taken a look at them yet. The existential parts of Noah looked at each other as quintessence was about to begin expressing its intent once more. After all existential extremity authorities were here, and only existential extremity authorities could manifest themselves within this infinite existential dominium sky. But Noah's main body radiated a gorgeous light once more, and his extremes gazed questioningly as a daring aura rose from Noah's body, coming to manifest outwards with a dazzling light as a visage adorned in a white robe appeared. Hair as dark as the farthest reaches of the omniverse, and fair skin as brilliant as it could be. A mischievous expression full of devilishness could be seen on its face as it gazed at the many existential extremity authorities looking towards it, its intent weaving out. "You all were going to have a party without inviting me?" The extremity of cheats spoke out, and silence reigned as all existential extremity authorities gazed at its manifestation. It wasn't an existential extremity authority, and yet here it was standing amidst them with their heavy pressures. A devilish glint shone within the manifestation of cheats as it continued. "We are here to ponder upon and choose from the innumerable paths forward. Yes? Let's get the show on the road. Is the focus on ourselves? The Imperium? Legacies? The existential Imperium exchange?" This manifestation of Noah spoke as if it were the most natural thing for it to be here, and Quintessence gave a nod at it with sharp eyes as its intent weaved out. "We've devoured an existential domain, and we can always devour more, with an eventual future path being the devouring and assimilation of many existential domains, as the infinite existential omniversal seed goes from a seed and into a genuine omniverse." Shockingly heavy words emanated from Noah's manifestation of Quintessence, as it dared to mention putting an entire omniverse under it, their main task being to aid in the production of such a thing. Cheats nodded with smiling eyes at this as it replied to Quintessence. "Yes, even though we didn't fully devour everything, the taste of an existential domain still lingers in my mouth. You all picked up on the traces of the great usurper within the Archeos Vacuous Pylos? That guy actually survived." Cheats uniquely mentioned one of their prior colleagues. "Noah Eckert, the great usurper, from the weavings of the few Basilius that Noah's existential illusory weavings killed before Archon Basilius Ignatius came. and from the land and dicasties of extremity themselves, Noah actually picked up traces of the great usurper. At the mention of this, the protagonist waved his hands dismissively as he radiated a golden glow. He'll do his own thing within the legacy of Ignatius, that is his path. We shall focus on ours, mainly mine, since we are here after my first prophecy was achieved. An endless weaving has awakened as my next prophecy can generate even grander glory. The protagonist declared his will. Tyranny and Infinity nodded in affirmation as the extremity of cheats clapped while beckoning towards the protagonist. Yes, the prophecy. Hey big guy, what did you get from the successful completion of this prophecy that we all helped achieve? You were undergoing elevation moments ago. The protagonist gazed towards Cheats, who was smiling with a devilish glint as it replied, I can live up to my truest extreme even further. The distinction of the weaver stemmed from me, the prophecy came from me, even you. A moment of profound tension arrived. Different parts of his existence were having a discussion above Noah's head. It was akin to him talking to himself. He was not crazy, this was just a unique method of his extremes. Chapter 2979, An Infinite Sky. 3. Many concepts were brought forth at the time that the protagonist arose, and this distinction was brought forth at this moment to serve as a reminder. The visage of the protagonist held a sense of majesty, as his gaze only caused the extremity of Cheats to nod with a smile as he replied. Yes, but our intents and desires aside, let's also not forget we are of the same source. We are merely part of a larger whole, as all of us have a single purpose. Different parts of Noah's will came to gaze at each other. Yes, each of them were distinct concepts that occasionally had their intents clash, but they were all ultimately extensions of Noah's will, and their main purpose was him. The expression of their extremes were all for him. Yes, the booming intent of quintessence reverberated out as all eyes turned towards it, a light of glory and direction shining within its eyes as it spoke. Protagonist, begin the design of a new prophecy and make it as grandiose and broken as possible. Loot, where are we with the analysis of fruits of existence? 2 quick directions, the last one being a question for Loot, who smiled to reveal gold teeth as if he were the grandest nouveau rich. Soon, and by then this ridiculous time it is taking to generate the fruits of existence should be cut real short. Even now, as the infinite, existential, omniversal seed produced one unique fruit of existence every minute, none of the fruits being generated within Noah's body has risen to completion. The time they took was a lot longer, even if multiple were being made at once. The extremes of Noah nodded and looked forward to this as quintessence continued. And then there's the elevation of ruination. Ruination. Anchored within Noah's soul, his progression was her progression, as the extremity of soul had its visage speak calmly. The judge number 1 and the judge number 2 are already being broken down by her, along with the other existential armaments. We don't need multiple trashy armaments, just a single supreme one. Though in our case, our next phase may not necessarily be battle-oriented. Yes, grand as he may be, overpowered as he may be, Noah was still only in the stage that others considered the neophyte stage of the existential dominium realm. He currently didn't hold a candle to the average archons of legacies, much less the most powerful entities within this omniverse, of which there were many. The next phase of his growth, the method for him to anneal his dominiums and expand them at a rate others couldn't even fathom. All gazes turned back towards a single manifestation. All gazes turned towards Loot as he smiled bright gold. We have lots of products in our great lands, and this omniverse seems uniquely designed with tools we can utilize to very quickly obtain fruits of existence. The more of these we attain, the faster we progress. Enemies that are on the list to be hunted like Archon Basilius Al-Abalon, they could be a whole stage beneath us and perish with a flick of a finger in mere days or weeks if our growth curve remains the same. Noah still held enemies who would be hunting him down with every part of their dominiums for having taken what they considered their lands, and by extension, the Imperium would also be his great enemy, since to them, he destroyed an existential domain under their banner. All of these had to be brought into account as Noah progressed. At this point, he could already talk about someone like Archon Basilius Al-Abalon, and not worry about his weavings being found out just by thinking about him and mentioning his name, his realm of power having now grown to the extent that his records remained his own, the infinite existential omniversal seed covering for him, and an entity of the Dominium realm didn't vastly or outstrip him in power. Ever so slowly, he was catching up to these monsters that had lived over eons as his direct path forward at this moment remained the heavy accumulation of fruits of existence. Very well, Quintessence clapped his hands. We shall solidify our power at this initial stage of the existential dominion realm, and since we shall not follow the convention of others, this stage shall be deemed the primordial stage of the existential dominion realm. Boom. The surroundings buzzed. The surroundings of the infinite existential dominium sky vibrated as Noah granted it a new distinction that was his alone. Noah's primordium stage would be something that the neophyte stage of others could not even compare to. And when his people moved across the quintessential gradations of extremity to arrive here, they would embark on the same quintessential path. As the surroundings of the dominium sky began to blaze with white rivers of flames forming into infinity symbols, Noah's manifestation of Forthan, Cheats, nodded with a thoughtful expression as he spoke before Quintessence could continue. In addition to all of this, I've begun to play around and tweak the Codex of Extremity. The light from this book should allow for free entry into the lands of the Imperium, and even protection while utilizing the existential Imperium exchange. It will set the stage as the key to entering this vast omniverse, and even for the lands that aren't existential domains, where one can accumulate fruits of existence. Cheats took it upon himself to begin doing this and more, as the other extremes no longer looked at this concept as if it weren't an existential one, their discussions continuing as a moment later, all of these manifestations of smoky brilliance began to recede down and delve back into Noah's lone figure. Their weavings continued within him. Their extremes moved according to his will, as they looked at many aspects of his existence all at once, and planned for a glorious future. And at this moment, Noah's eyes opened with blinding white brilliance, his dominium seemingly trembling from excitement, while staring at the endless dominium sky around them as the first unique fruit of existence has been produced within the dominion. An unfathomable achievement. The Weaver of Extremity was gradually becoming something else entirely, as with his own existence, he fully produced a fruit of existence for the first time. Chapter 2980, Imperium Knights Dispatched. 1. As the existential omniversal emperor began to produce fruits of existence within his own dominium, weavings of his actions were spreading outward, their effects beginning to unfold at this moment, across the endless expanse of the omniverse, at speeds unfathomably faster than light, in a manner that couldn't be fully captured due to the existential light covering it. A massive circular vessel crossed the omniverse towards one of the many, many renowned domains of the Imperium. Within this vessel, a space the size of a plane of existence was contained within, as at the very center of this space, there was an area surrounded by an expanse of a golden sea that currently had a single being and his attendants lined up to his left and right. Around him, a dense number of illusory screens filtered out weavings of information, his glorious visage and golden hair simmering with a serious expression at this moment as he suffered a loss that he had to report. Master, we have received permission to warp in. To his right, an attendant at the neonate stage of the existential dominion realm bowed slightly while sending the news. The golden-haired observer nodded as he twisted his hand, the command being activated as the whole vessel disappeared right away. By the time it reappeared, the blank darkness around everything had begun to be lit up as waves of blue and red auroras began weaving here and there. It was the glory of an extremely potent existential domain under the banner of the Imperium. As they came closer, the bright red and blue auroras only became more brilliant as far ahead of them. An unfathomable concentration of power and might was gathered. The golden-haired observer sighed with both relief and grimness after returning here, the voice of his vessel echoing out as it began to slow down and come to a stop. We have arrived at Cappadocia! Cappadocia! A bustling existential domain of the Imperium that held one of the three existential lineages of the Imperium. The vessel of the observer came to a stop in an empty area as not too far from him, other uniquely shaped vessels were also anchored. The surroundings were entirely filled with auroras of red and blue light that seemed to stretch out endlessly, with the area ahead of them shining with the most blinding light, as this was their destination. The observer warped outside of his vessel with his attendants, their figures disappearing soon after as they became wrapped in an existential light. They were guided by a specified weaving, their bodies transported across the vastness of this domain, as they were directly taken into the foldings of a plane of existence. At the center of such a plane of existence, an advanced fantastical citadel floated grandly, its exterior pulsing with existential authority, as initially, the golden-haired observer and his attendants arrived within the walls of this citadel that were bustling with tens of thousands of entities. But a moment after his arrival, his figure alone became wrapped by a light and disappeared, his attendants being left behind as he was taken towards a central castle atop this floating citadel. When the golden-haired observer appeared again, he found himself standing in a blue hall lined with planolith crystallos as decorations, his gaze directed towards the end of the hall that held a red throne behind a crystalline table filled with golden pages. On the throne, an old man took off his glasses while raising his brows towards the golden-haired observer, beckoning with his hand, as a shocking attractive force pulled the observer forward to stand directly before him. I perused through the weavings you've already sent over. An entire existential domain perished. The culprit is a seed controlled by omniversal pillagers. Does that make fucking sense to you, Xavier? A terrifying pressure descended as a blazing, transparent golden light of an utterly heavy dominion seemed to be emanating from the old man. It only pressed down lightly on the transparent purple light of the dominion of the observer called Xavier. But this royal kneeled down with a somber expression, as he couldn't say anything. And now you request for the mobilization of the Cappadocia Imperium Knights to track down this Noah Osmond? Yes, Imperium Marshal King. I believe this will be suitable to confirm exactly who is behind this scene. Observer. Xavier replied with his head bowed down as the entity he referred to as the Imperium Marshal King sneered while shaking. Observers, Knights, Marshal Kings. These were their rankings within the Imperium, as observers traversed to different areas of the Omniverse and were tasked with overseeing the workings of the countless existential domains out there. Knights enforced the rules of the Imperium, as it was the highest honor of an Imperium Royal to be chosen as a knight. And Marshal Kings, one like this entity before Observer Xavier controlled important locations of the Imperium, with Cappadocia Enclave only being one of them, as this entity could actually command and direct legions of knights. This seemingly harmless old man was an amalgamation of terrifying power that Xavier had to bow down to, waiting for the final command, as this entity's voice came out calmly while he stamped a golden page on the crystalline desk. The excuse of omniversal pillagers behind a seed is useless. Next time, at least place a suitable blame on something as critical as the disappearance of an entire existential domain. This is something the Imperium demands an answer to, as due to this, the Red Legion of the Cappadocia Imperium Knights will be mobilized. You're lucky they're stationed here for their vacation. Observer Xavier's body trembled at such words. The Red Legion of the Cappadocia Imperium Knights. Wasn't this the legion in charge of overseeing the protection of certain dangerous regions where omniversal pillagers frequented? Seeing your expression, you must think it's the genuine Red Legion. No, it is just their trainee candidates. But even that will be overkill for something like this. The Imperium Marshal King snapped his fingers as he saw the shaking figure of the observer, as in the next moment, the hall buzzed and became filled with the auras of 12 powerful entities. Knights of the Imperium, their bodies blazed with dominions of purple brilliance, as each one could be the head of a legacy. And yet they gained much more in their position as Cappadocia Imperium Knights, an entire enclave standing behind them. At their forefront was a dazzling armored man and a woman who nodded with respect towards the Imperium Marshal King, his command booming out as soon as they arrived. Hunt down and capture this supposed seed, Noah Osmond. His location is approximately A horrific halcyon light of a shocking soul dominium rose and flashed 9 times, the eyes of the Imperium Martial King becoming glazed pure gold as he sent streams of lights towards the 2 leading knights of the trainee candidates of the Red Legion of Cappadocia Imperium Knights. Scour that whole area and see what you can find. The Imperium Knights nodded with serious expressions as the Imperium Martial King turned his head towards the observer, his eyes squinting as he spoke. You will go with them, but first, send for the Archons of the Legacies that let a fucking seed play them for chumps. Another command was given. But on this day, a small portion of the forces of the Imperium were pointed towards a certain direction, towards an entity that had yet to become well known within the Imperium. Chapter 2981, Imperium Knights Dispatched. 2. Outside of the complex and vast existential domain that was known as Cappadocia, auroras of red and blue light stretched endlessly all around as a vessel set off from this place with purpose. This particular vessel was unique as it seemed like a long cerulean ruler. Small in its nature as atop it, the renowned figures that held distinctions as knights of the Imperium could be seen. Among these knights, Acalusia raised her armored hands to observe the tome-like object in her hand that radiated a crimson light, this being none other than a codex of extremity, as she seemed to be in constant communication with it. Thereafter, she raised her head behind her to observe the other knight commander leading this excursion with her, Knight Palmino. Exceeding the neonate stage and the Sequor stage, he was like her, standing in the Teleos stage of the existential dominion realm, going from shining with a transcendental white light to a blazing verdant light, and ultimately the Teleos stage where their dominiums emanated a profound purple light. A stage where their dominium gained a sense of existential identity that made them move past the identities of nobodies in this vast omniverse. Knight Acalusia gazed at all the Imperium Knights at Teleos stage of the existential dominium realm behind her as she put away the Codex of Extremity in her hands and locked onto the only one who wasn't adorned in their regal crimson existential knight armament. Her intent was calm, and yet it held eons of ferociousness and power as the body of the observer subtly trembled before he moved across the flat open vessel, crossing the omniverse to appear before Knight Acalusia. Tell me about this target. Tell me about Noah Osmont. Her eyes contained immeasurable might. Beside her, the second Knight Commander Palmino also gazed over with a cold look as each of the Imperium Knights here were Destro-y-her. Trainees being bred to join other Knight Legions to enforce the rule of the Imperium across the Omniverse. Something like a seed was far beneath them, but they even took this seriously, as their vessel pulsed with brilliance before disappearing towards a certain direction. And in this same direction they were heading towards, coming from another angle, there was another party much smaller than theirs that held a similar purpose. Moving within the folds of non-existence, the massive body of a draconian entity mounted by an excessively gorgeous Sanctus Princess could be seen moving slowly. On her forehead, the scripture glowed in a gorgeous verdant light as her green hair pulsed with glory, her intent serene as it rang out. The weavings covering up whatever we're following are uniquely hard to track, as I can only confirm this general direction, and it'll be hard work of moving our dominiums constantly to search for what may be hidden. Her intent showed a hint of frustration due to this process, taking so long as the draconic knight below her asked, "Shall I call for more knights on your behalf, Sanctus Princess?" "No, let's keep things on the quiet side as we were directed. If it's anything major that we can't handle, we will just report and make an exit." Her weaving was powerful and unquestionable as the draconic knight below her nodded. Their search continued. And thus, the weavings of a slowly unfolding stage were set as entities with their own desires converged around the general location of one man. A man who was currently exploring the limits of his dominion as his will appeared within a magisterial forge filled with dazzling auroras of light. It was his infinite existential forge where the first fruit of existence was formed, its surroundings filled with swirling waves of infinity symbols as towards its center, the dazzling figure of ruination could be seen. Noah grabbed the newly formed quintessential fruit of existence in his hands and took a bite as he appeared before the hibernating figure of ruination. In her surroundings, silver-white existential armaments lay half-melted as among them, the guns that Basilius Moraine utilized could be seen. Currently, a transparent white light unique to a dominium was forming around ruination, as her crimson gold hair now held traces of white. Her whole figure surrounded by blazing flames of existential light. Noah really looked at her as waves of information arose. Primordium existential omniversal armament ruination, a unique entity with endless possibilities, as currently she is undergoing a transformation to be the first Primordium omniversal armament. Already, her capabilities have become innumerable in their uses, as she has become a type of armament that can take many forms. Possible forms include sword, spear, shield, vessel, gun, flail, cannon. The weavings were enough to make Noah look forward to a great future, as he looked over everything before nodding and disappearing with a flash of brilliance. Outside, his main body also moved away from the dazzling throne of light and manifestation of the infinite existential omniversal seed that was producing fruits of existence constantly, taking a step to instantly appear within his existential omniversal blacksmith's forge. A forge that others would despair at if they entered, as an existential light flowed all around it, with forges and anvils radiating a heavy light of power buzzing throughout, as currently this existential light was flustered in one area. An area that showed the fearsome outlines of utterly majestic automatons that shone with golden blue grandeur. Noah appeared in front of a lineup of these automatons that were the size of worlds at their smallest. The potent authority of mana dynamics raging and flooding into them from the surroundings as they seemed like efficient killing machines. Humanoid in form, they looked like massively advanced robotics with the most muscular visage one could have. Two pairs of cerulean wings stretching behind them as a pair of eyes holding 9 pupils pulsed on their heads. No nose or mouth could be seen, as these were the existential automatons that the infinite existential omniversal seed had been building this whole time. Each one of them emanated terrifying waves of power at the 9th gradation of extremity that almost seemed to be spilling out, seeming even more terrifying than Decastes of extremity. Chapter 2982, Buying and Selling 1. A light more terrifying than the Decastes of extremity. But even this was oppressed by silent auras of power, opposite to the dozens of existential automatons Noah was staring at. This was because behind Noah, there was an invisible army of existential illusory weavings that was kneeling towards Noah and awaiting his commands, many of them being those at the primordium stage of the existential dominion realm. The automatons were wondrous constructs, but they weren't useful to Noah in terms of battle, as when it came to this, the existential illusory weavings of the enemies he had killed came to the forefront. But the existential automatons held their own terrifying uses that he planned for, as he would begin stretching his fingers across the omniverse with them. They were built for such a purpose at this moment, as magisterial existential omniversal extremity passages pointed down and gushed out authorities that flowed towards these automatons, the existential illusory weavings, their bodies only radiating ever-increasing grandeur. Step forward. His voice boomed out towards a single automaton, as it was met with one of these massive constructs coming forward and kneeling respectfully. The blue wings on its back also bent, as it showed it would only ever listen to the commands of a single master. And yet, Noah planned to sell these existential automatons, just like the Decastes of extremity were being sold to others on the existential Imperium exchange. And his purpose was not fruits of existence alone. He stared at the existential automaton ahead of him as its weavings bloomed before his eyes. A construct slightly exceeding the peak of the gradations of extremity. Forged under the banner of many existential extremity authorities, its source was finalized by the weavings of mana dynamics that allowed all the authorities that forged it to be changeable and considered blank existential authorities that can meld with any others. Noah nodded while gazing at the details of the automaton, with mana dynamics coming in as the last piece to make it so that when Noah sold these to others, They could be listed as if they were unbound from any existential extremity authority and could seamlessly be integrated into any existential domains. This meant that if he were successful, he could have his forged automatons swirling with his existential extremity authorities, be taken into the homes of powerful entities from the Imperium without him ever having to lift a finger. And to complete these entities right now, let pathogenicity flow to their very core. His command boomed out as from his dominiums a devilish light erupted out. It was not yet existential, and yet, the extremity of cheat supports the extremity of pathogenicity. The extremity of loot supports the extremity of pathogenicity. The extremity of quintessence supports the extremity of pathogenicity. Apart from cheats, Noah's existential extremity authorities all propped up the legions of pathogenicity as a devilish light bloomed and began to permeate into the existential automatons ahead of him. At the same time that Noah was doing this, part of his was already delved into the existential Imperium exchange accessed through the entry neonate license. He had perused fully through memories of Basilius Moraine, who routinely utilized the entry neonate license, so he knew exactly what he needed to do as his will appeared in the area termed My Marketplace, arriving at an area of immense blank whiteness that seemed like a canvas one could fill up. In this space, Noah's voice echoed out, "Add a product." The surroundings buzzed as if they sought to establish a connection. The entry neonate license within Noah pulsed as the tight grasp of the Codex of Extremity controlled by Noah and the infinite existential omniversal seed became ever tighter around it. This was to ensure that Noah would be seen as nothing else other than a member of the Imperium, with the security around the existential Imperium exchange being extremely tight as in the unique space he was in. Noah felt a penetrative light flash. And the result after this penetrative light flash was a glorious one. A new existential signature has been detected wishing to list products within the exchange. Please state the name you wish to be distinguished with and the distinction of the enclave connected to the products to be listed. The voice was feminine in nature and entirely robotic, Noah's eyes flashing brilliantly as his own intent weaved out. The weaver of existence of the infernal enclave. The weaver of existence, the infernal enclave. His intent listing these spread out as a moment later, a white light flashed as in the center of this blank space, a magic circle began to be etched in real time as it radiated a profound existential extremity of good. When Noah's eyes gazed at it, a million flames flickered as its identity showed itself, the existential authority of spatial. He caught mere wisps of its weaving. He didn't delve any deeper lest his probings be discovered. But this authority was a powerful and heavy one as it dealt with the very existence of space, capable of transporting products vast distances within the omniverse from one point to another. Please place the product or products to be listed in the designated space, and they will undergo preliminary review. Before the intent even finished, Noah waved his hands to summon one of his existential automatons. Miniaturized in nature and still just as terrifying as at this moment, the existential extremity authority flowing across it was blank. As if it didn't have a signature, as if it were unbound. These were the means of mana dynamics that stated the very essence of authority could be changed from one form to another. A dazzling light flashed as soon as the automaton was placed on the circle, radiating existential light. Preliminary review has discovered an existential construct of extremely high quality and unbound by any existential extremity authority. No further review is required as the product can directly be listed on the exchange. Please design a description of your product and set the price before submitting it to be displayed. And thank you for utilizing the exchange of the Imperium. A wondrous reality unfolded. Noah's smile was innocent and bright at this moment, as his intent weaved forward akin to a silent beast lying in waiting, ready to devour an untold number of things. Chapter 2983, Buying and Selling. 2. On a day like no other, a new entry appeared in the marketplace of the existential Imperium Exchange. 3 fruits of existence. Peak gradation of extremity, approaching neonate stage of the existential dominion realm and power. Useful in the management of existential domains, or as fodders of exploration, This unbound automaton worker was produced by the Infernal Enclave under the direct supervision of the Weaver of Existence. The description was laid out simply as the price was utterly ridiculous. With Noah setting up such a high price as the power of this automaton truly approached the existential dominion realm. This could expand the uses of a construct greatly, as it may not just be left alone to manage an existential domain. There were many dangerous areas within the Omniverse that, apart from existential domains, they were also a focus for the Imperium to explore, as one could obtain fruits of existence there as well. Points of existential entropic singularities, where immense danger and opportunity lay to the extent that even the dominiums of Imperium Knights could fall there. This should be the only place Al-Abalim and Ignatius can go to now. Noah's intent rang out within himself as he continued to bring more and more existential automatons into the marketplace and list them on the exchange. After losing their own existential domains, places like these were the only ones that you could risk your life on to attain fruits of existence, and any legacies that did not own an existential domain had to be in these regions. From the memories he devoured, Noah knew there were many pure battles-orientated legacies with high mortality rates that practically lived in regions such as these, and other legacies and enclaves of the Imperium were even more stretched out across the Omniverse in even more dangerous areas where omniversal pillagers appeared. Not just them, but also those of the Sanctus Populi, omniversal pillagers, Imperium. The major factions of the Omniverse swirled in Noah's mind as the weavings of his extremes planned and plotted, looking for the best path to navigate across it all, as he didn't want to just be limited to a single faction. As his will moved and transferred the existential automatons, he gazed out in the blank openness as he considered many things. Dynamis of extremity were no longer coursing within him, but he did have all of his extremes flowing in synchrony with each other, as the idea of Oraculum was still stronger than ever. The idea of Indefatigable was stronger than ever. Thanatos burned just as brightly. He could feel the weavings of the future, and more, as when he pondered on cause and effect. My name should have been passed to the lower rungs of the Imperium, now due to the disappearance of an entire existential domain. To follow up on this, would a few knights be dispatched? A whole knight legions? He was pondering on how the future could unfold, as with the limited memories the Basilius had on the Imperium, Noah knew about the terrifying order of knights within this power, and rumors of how ruthless their means were. Any rebelling archons who didn't pay tribute to the Imperium, any of those who sided with the Sanctus Populi, or any sort of violations against the Imperium, faced the blades of the Imperium Knights that always enforced the rule of the Imperium. But when it came to this, Noah was not entirely sure of their capabilities to locate him, with the tracing of any entity at the existential dominium realm being something extremely hard, with their records being their own. But powerful beings could still figure out a general coordinate of an entity, so long as they had some form of distinction to go on. The weavings of his extremes buzzed inside of his dominium, as within, a great deal of possibilities unfolded as at this very moment. The protagonist has ascertained the beginnings of a profound prophecy. One of his most prolific extremes began to move with valor across the endless expanse of the Omniverse, inside of an unstable, anomalous existential domain. Across the Omniverse, there were a great deal of unique domains as among them. There existed domains that had an extremely short lifeline. Some would only ever be present for an eon, and the extremely dangerous ones may be present for a mere number of years, months, or even days. They became known as unstable, anomalous existential domains because they had extremely concentrated levels of existential authority within them. And yet, during their formation, something wrong occurred as their source quickly became unstable and expressed waves of entropic authority, with such domains facing a demise soon after. But they were still existential domains, as in this process, all of their existential extremity authorities were converged to give birth to unique fruits of existence. For entities who were able to locate an unstable, anomalous existential domain, it was akin to a dangerous treasure trove, but also one filled with immense dangers, as the existential authority coursing within such an unstable domain gave birth to even greater anomalies and dangers that could shatter the dominiums of those at the neonate stage in an instant, within such a domain. A vessel withstood arcs of booming existential storms all around it that raged with a violet light. Inside this vessel, a man with an unpleasant expression was surrounded by 2 Imperium knights and rows of attendants all around him as he was looking at multiple dredges of deformed decasties of extremity that were returned to the vessel in front of him. Every single one of these is fucking useless. Can't even withstand a few seconds of existential bombardment. And these were made by the spirits of the Forge Enclave? Trash! He bellowed out with a sense of anger, as this entity was Imperium Royal of somewhat high standing, who was currently exploring an unstable, anomalous existential domain. Is there absolutely nothing that can help me explore this before I have to report it above? The Imperium Royal sighed while tapping on a radiant entry neonate license in his hands, his will entering the existential Imperium exchange. Chapter 2984, Buying and Selling. 3. Regions that held unstable, anomalous existential domains were extremely dangerous to delve into, as one would not normally use themselves, or in the case of an Imperium Royal, they wouldn't even send their knights out first. This was because eons of experiences showed how there could be existential distortion in regions such as these, that could warp someone into distant foreign spaces, with the weavings shared by the dominiums of some Imperium Royals before they died showing them being warped into the hunting grounds of omniversal pillagers, regions under the domains of other forces, or even areas where existential extremity authorities were nullified. If such a thing occurred, one could only wait for death. So when it came to exploring any of these regions, many Imperium Royals would have constructs pave the way for the exploration, and they would map out the dangers of an entire unstable, anomalous existential domain before sending out their knights for attendance and collecting mass pledges. Do I really have to purchase existential dominium constructs? The profits from this whole venture will be greatly reduced after that. As he entered the existential Imperium exchange and began to sort through the countless items listed there, the golden-haired Imperium Royal sighed while questioning his next moves. His hair shone with a golden luster as his body was round and filled with fat, but his face still gave off a sense of profound beauty and power as he stood at the seaport stage of existential dominion. He was known as Imperium Royal Destro-y-her. The 2 knights he was granted from his enclave were of the same stage, with barely a third of the attendants having achieved the neonate stage, as the powers he controlled were very little, and yet he was trying to eat up an unstable, anomalous existential domain that he discovered before having to report it. His will rapidly perused thousands of products every second as he looked for alternative solutions. Come on, any junk that can at least withstand a minute before being destroyed. If I can just map and confirm the safety of the entrance ahead, I can attain droves of fruits of existence. A sense of urgency was welling up within as he looked through the affordable constructs below the existential dominium realm, and as thousands passed before his eyes, he stopped his scroll and something that stood out. Among the listed constructs, many had prices of, or even, a fruit of existence, and yet there was actually a construct listed with a cost of 3 fruits of existence. Ha! Who the hell is bold? What kind of things would you list for such a price? Unless it shits existential gold. His curiosity got the better of him as he clicked on the listing, its details flowing out before him. 3 fruits of existence. Peak gradation of extremity, approaching neonate stage of the existential dominium realm power. Useful in the management of existential domains, or as fodders of exploration, this unbound automaton worker was produced by the Infernal Enclave under the direct supervision of the Weaver of Existence. Approaching the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm? These words were extremely bold as the demarcation of constructs between the gradations of extremity and the dominium realm was an uncrossable one. For any entity to say they were about to bridge this with their constructs, Destro-y-her had a pondering gaze as he knew anything listed under the existential Imperium exchange underwent review, and it was hard to push out defective or false products. He could either continue buying multiple Mordecastes workers for a fraction of fruits of existence, or he could take a risk and buy a single one of these unbound automaton workers. As for whether its power truly approached the neonate stage of the existential dominium realm, this would be the risk he had to take. Bah, fuck it. Come on. He clicked on the outline of the golden blue figure and paid the price of 3 fruits of extremity. The space in front of him buzzing as a runic magic circle of immense spatial authority. A moment later, Shah! A glorious muscular automaton revealed itself before him. He whistled at its visage as it was bathed in a glorious golden blue light. A pair of blue wings stretched out behind it as the moment it appeared. Its eyes blazed with 9 pupils of glorious light as Desamara nodded his head. Nice new design, the Infernal Enclave, is it? Let's see how your product is. He waved his hands to take this unbound automaton worker outside, a fruit of existence flowing from him and towards its chest as this automaton absorbed its light and came to life right away. It appeared inside his vessel as his attendants and knights gazed at it with question marks, wondering what their master had wasted resources on now. But Desamara paid no heed to any gazes as his existential extremity authority flowed outside of his body and into this unbound automaton worker right away, instantly changing its blank nature as with his eyes, he saw it take on the brilliant purple hue of his existential extremity authority. The very extremity of royalty. Good, let's go. His eyes flashed with a purple light as the vision of the bound automaton worker became his. Its figure that was standing tall, pulsing with light a moment later as it was warped outside of the vessel. Violet tendrils of light smashed down all around as the moment the bound automaton worker appeared. Its massive muscular body weaved left and right to evade them. Oh? The eyes of Imperium Royal Desamara lit up as he could see the clouded violet storm ahead and the unstable mirrored planes of existence cracking nearby, his intent going towards the bound automaton worker to delve deeper into the violet cloud to see what lay ahead. Yet a second later, boom! A heavy tendril of violet light with existential authority smashed onto the gold and blue automaton as it wasn't able to evade it in time, causing the gaze of Desamara to flicker towards anger, as he expected another purchase to be destroyed. But when the violet light faded, the automaton could be seen, uninjured, as tendrils of violet existential light covered its body with its muscles spasming, but it seemed fine. It even looked like the violet light was absorbed into its body before it disappeared into the weavings of its authorities. Then, unhindered, it continued. Good automaton, from the Infernal Enclave, eh? Very well. With a sense of excitement, the Imperium Royal forged forward. At the same time, unbeknownst to him, within the supposedly bound automaton worker, a brilliant colorless light of quintessence arose. Chapter 2985, The Eyes of Vassals. 1. From the moment the unbound automaton worker was bought from the existential Imperium Exchange and then warped across vast distances of the Omniverse. First, the main thing to appreciate was the wonder and might of the existential Imperium Exchange that could allow the transport of constructs and other things listed on it across such vast distances. Then, after Noah's automaton actually arrived within the vessel of the Imperium Royal surrounded by 2 knights in attendance, Noah's will was already active, as even though the automaton looked like it was free of any specific existential authority, it was filled with Noah's authorities. It did not need fruits of existence to be active. And yet those who bought it would treat it like so, as when the Imperium Royal Decimer gave a fruit of existence to the automaton, Noah simply allowed it to sink into his flowing existential extremity authorities and bring this loot back to him. And when the dazzling purple hue of the existential extremity authority of royalty flowed from the Imperium Royal before Noah and into the automaton worker, far, far away from the current location where this Imperium Royal was, a prompt rose before Noah's eyes. Your existence has been exposed closely with the existential extremity authority of royalty. The weavings of royalty have been grasped by you as you attain the extremity of loyalty. Existential Analytical Looter is now analyzing this authority and breaking down its attainment as an existential authority. In an extremely short period of time, the most his body was exposed with the authority of the Imperium Royal, He instantly crossed the gradations of extremity with this authority and brought it towards peace. And then existential analytical looter broke it down so that if Noah wished in the future, he could seamlessly take this authority to the existential level. This alone was a shocking action in itself, but what it represented for the future was the truly astounding reality. It meant that for any entities who bought his existential automatons, any authority they gave to it in order to bind it would be known to Noah. It would be granted to Noah, their authority, the authority of any existential domains they became bound to, and even others. This was clearly expressed when Noah's automaton worker was taken outside of the vessel and thrown out into the unstable anomalous existential domain, radiating storms of violet existential light. When the body of the automaton was smashed with a thick tendril of this authority, your existence has been exposed closely to an unstable but extremely pure natal existential extremity authority. Your weavings are studying this extreme closely to discern its intent. Existential analytical looter is analyzing this weaving closely to discern its intent. Natal. An authority not born and expanded to a boundary by an entity, but from this error of a blooming existential singularity here that caused this unstable anomalous existential thing. The existential automaton worker would have to bathe in even more of it before Noah could attain this as well. But it was only an inevitability. Within the existential automaton, Noah's will fully rose as he took over its workings, mana dynamics flowing smoothly to change all authorities as if they were of royalty, while quintessence covered all gaps. He looked at the billowing storms and clouds of violet-white light, as even though he was in the comfort of his own infinite existential omniversal seed, one of his tools had already been bought, as he instantly arrived at a location where dangers and treasures lay hand in hand. And what the automaton could see was relayed back to the supposed new master that was the Imperium Royal Decimara within the vessel now far behind Noah. But Noah could control the gaze of the automaton. If, let's say, he bypassed these danger zones of this unstable anomalous existential domain and came across any natal existential armaments or fruits of existence, what was there in reality could be very different to the feedback that the Imperium Royal received. The possibilities of what Noah could do here were limitless. Let's go. The 9 pupils of the existential automaton shone brightly as they now reflected the full will of the existential omniversal emperor, delving deeper into an unstable, anomalous existential domain as far behind him. Shit, man, what did this infernal enclave produce? It truly nears an existential dominion construct. Imperium Royal Decimara lauded the wonders of the existential automaton as it pushed deeper into the unstable anomalous existential domain relentlessly. He felt like he had come across a possible hidden treasure trove with an enclave very few had heard of yet, because he knew all the renowned enclaves who could produce rare and truly prized things, as the infernal enclave was not one of them. So with shifting eyes and a heavy sense of greed, he looked at his reserves of fruit of existence as a part of his will returned to the existential Imperium Exchange, locating the listing of the unbound automaton worker as he bellowed out. But it all, he wanted to monopolize it all. He wanted the infernal enclave he had never heard of to be something only he knew of for as long as possible. So he set out with the task of buying up everything it listed, as at this time, it was only the unbound automaton worker. What he didn't know was that even if he continued to buy them until all of his resources dried up, Noah could continue making them with the majesty of the infinite existential omniversal seed, as he would never run out. All of these were the weavings blooming on the surface of the grand fable of the Weaver of Extremity. But below all of this majesty, there was also a foundation built below it that moved with just as much intricacy. And there were some beings who could describe this foundation much more than any others, within the infinite existential omniversal seed. The scribe of the infinite existential omniversal seed was gazing at and recording all the intricacies blooming within this unfathomable domain through her own eyes of a vassal. Chapter 2986, The Eyes of Vassals. 2. She was adorned in a black veil that covered her from head to toe, her fair skin only visible through her eyes, as she felt like she was back during her tenure as a shadow bearer. It was a position that benefited her even now, as since she was a close aid to the foremost queen of the infinite existential omniversal seed, she was blessed with many things. Her frozen queen had given her fruits of existence freely, as her own gradations had risen heavily, where even though she wasn't among the die-hard fans of power, she arrived at the 7th gradation of extremity. And now, she was observing the visible change and alterations of the weavings and entities who had lived for billions of years as they came to understand just which lands they were currently in. One of the foremost case studies was the primogenitor of steel, who was among those that reigned supreme in the Vitalis hyperversal domain. After the battle with the lesser Mumesthais and the subsequent loot that was granted to him and many others, the stage of power of this old entity finally came to reach the 9th gradation of extremity. And when the scribe watched his expression, he seemed more dazed and lost for the most part, as if he was questioning what he was doing for millions upon millions of years before this. Apart from him, there were others whose expressions were filled with determination as the choices they took led them to a similar stage. The visage of the young Emperor Prince Henry was bathed in the golden luster of an existential extremity authority, as he also stood at the 9th gradation of extremity, his gaze far above, as if he were looking at a shadow of his father that he could never overcome. Cisbarbatos, another queen of the infinite existential omniversal seed, held a stage of terrifying power that seemed to be half in the gradations of extremity and half outside of it. Her power was unique, as she and the other queens shared a great deal of strength with the master, and since his realm was only becoming more unfathomable, so would theirs. Then, there were other new entrants like Ishtar, Sargon, and the Sumerian architect, who had defeated Mumesthais of their own and attained enough fruits of existence to touch upon the 9th gradation of extremity, along with one unlikely contender that the scribe had been watching closely over the last few days. The demon that had fallen from her throne a long time ago. Her fair crimson hands now rose as she seemed to be looking at who she was without believing. Among those who had made it, among those who stood at the peak of the gradations of extremity. The daughter of hatred questioned with her own eyes whether she really stood at the 9th gradation of extremity. Around her, those who had been with her through the past battles were a stage before her, but just as happy, with the figure of Ayame coming and hugging Lilith from behind while releasing a bellow of happiness, the weavings of infinity pulsing around them. Yes, joy, a rarity in this rat race of more and more power, but some beings could bask in their accomplishments, even if momentarily, as at this moment, only half of their wills were here. The other half, even the scribe's will included, were all pulled towards another unique location that seemed to exist between the weavings of existence and records of the infinite existential omniversal seed. The scribe closed her eyes as she sensed her other half in a place recently designed by the existential omniversal emperor. In this space, an endless clear sea could be felt all around them, as when they opened their eyes, there wasn't any sign of the chains they knew wrapped around them before. Only an endless blue sea all around, as when they gazed far above, they seemed to barely catch a glimpse of an endless